Welcome to A1 Storyteller, where we bring you the most gripping, heart-pounding, and thought-provoking stories that expose injustice, highlight resilience, and deliver unexpected twists that will leave you speechless. Today's story is about one woman's terrifying encounter with a racist cop who thought he could abuse his power, until he found out too late that her son was the one man he should have never crossed. Imagine this. A kind, elderly schoolteacher, loved by her community, is suddenly accused of a crime she didn't commit. Handcuffed, humiliated, and thrown into a jail cell, she faces the worst day of her life at the hands of a power-hungry officer who believes he is above the law. But what this cop doesn't know is that her son is not just any man. He's an elite FBI agent, trained to take down corruption. And when he arrives, he doesn't just demand justice. He delivers it in the most shocking way possible. This is a story of power, karma, and the kind of justice that makes your heart race. Stay tuned, because by the end of this story, you'll be cheering for one of the most satisfying takedowns of a corrupt officer you've ever seen. So sit back, hit that like button, and get ready, because this one is about to get intense. It was a warm afternoon in the small town of Somerville, where time seemed to move at its own slow. Margaret Lewis, a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, had spent her morning tending to her small vegetable garden before heading into town for groceries. She moved with the grace of a woman who had lived a full and honorable life, one built on patience, resilience, and an unbreakable spirit. As she placed her bags into the trunk of her well-kept but aging sedan, she heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a stop behind her. Turning slowly, Margaret saw a police cruiser with its lights flashing. Her heart sank. Stepping out of the car was Officer Brian Calloway, a man who had built a reputation for harassing minorities in the town. His face was twisted into a smirk as he adjusted his belt and took slow, measured steps toward Margaret. "Hold it right there, lady," he barked, his voice sharp and laced with arrogance. Margaret straightened her shoulders. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Calloway folded his arms. "We got a report of a suspicious individual fitting your description, stealing from this store." Margaret blinked, her hands instinctively clutching her purse. "That's impossible. I paid for my groceries. You can check with the cashier." Calloway chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice. "Oh yeah? Let's see some ID." Margaret hesitated, not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew exactly where this was going. She had lived long enough to recognize the venom behind Calloway's eyes. She reached for her purse, pulling out her ID and holding it up for him. "Here." Calloway snatched it, barely glancing at it before tossing it back at her. The small plastic card fluttered to the ground. Margaret exhaled sharply. "That was unnecessary." Calloway's smirk widened. "Oh? You got a problem with the way I do things?" A small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves. A young woman, Kayla, pulled out her phone and began recording. "She did nothing wrong," someone called out. Calloway ignored them. He stepped closer, towering over Margaret. "I need to check your bags." Margaret frowned. "Officer, you can go inside and ask the cashier." Are you refusing to comply?" Calloway interrupted, his hand drifting to his holstered gun. Margaret swallowed hard. She had been through the civil rights movement. She had seen hatred in its purest form. And now, decades later, she was staring into the face of a man who embodied everything she had fought against. Slowly, she reached for her grocery bags. But before she could hand them over, Calloway snatched them and dumped their contents onto the ground. Gasps echoed from the bystanders. Milk, bread, and fresh produce rolled across the pavement. Margaret's lips trembled. "Why are you doing this?" Calloway smirked. "Because I can?" Kayla took a step forward. "You racist piece of—" "Back off, little girl," Calloway snapped, "or you'll be next." Then, before Margaret could say another word, Calloway grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. A sharp cry escaped her lips. The crowd erupted in protest. "You can't do that! She's an old woman! She didn't do anything!" Calloway ignored them and roughly slapped the cuffs onto Margaret's frail wrists. "You're under arrest for theft and resisting an officer." Margaret, tears in her eyes, looked at Kayla. "Please, call my son." Kayla nodded. As Calloway shoved Margaret into the back of the police cruiser, Kayla found Margaret's phone, searched her contacts, and dialed the number listed as James Lewis, hundreds of miles away. James Lewis sat in the headquarters of the FBI's Organized Crime Division, wrapping up a high-level meeting. His reputation as one of the agency's most fearless agents had earned him the respect of colleagues and the fear of criminals. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. Frowning, he stepped into the hallway. "This is Lewis." A panicked voice came through. "Agent Lewis, your mother's been arrested by a racist cop in Somerville. It's all on camera. She didn't do anything wrong." James' blood turned to ice. "What? Who is this?" "I was there. I saw it happen. He manhandled her like she was a criminal." James clenched his jaw. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and turned to his partner, Agent Ross. "I need a jet now." Back in Somerville, Margaret sat in a cold holding cell, her hands trembling. She had spent her life teaching children to be good, to be just, to believe in the law. And now she was locked up like a common criminal for doing absolutely nothing. Calloway stood outside the cell, twirling his keys. "Enjoying your stay?" Margaret met his gaze with quiet dignity. "My son will be here soon." Calloway snorted. "Oh yeah, what's he gonna do? Sing a sad song for you?" Margaret simply smiled. "You'll see." 2 hours later, a sleek, black SUV tore down the road, coming to a screeching halt in front of the station. Out stepped Agent James Lewis. Wearing a sharp suit and an expression of deadly calm, he moved with the confidence of a man who was used to commanding authority. Calloway, lounging at the front desk, barely glanced up. "What do you want?" James pulled out his badge. "Special Agent James Lewis, FBI." His voice was razor sharp. "Where's my mother?" Calloway's smirk faltered. You arrested a retired schoolteacher for no reason. You used excessive force. That's a civil rights violation." James took a step closer. "And I will personally see to it that you never wear a badge again." Calloway's throat bobbed. "Now wait a minute." James leaned in, his voice dangerously low. "Open that cell." A beat of silence, then Calloway fumbled for his keys. Seconds later, Margaret was free. James pulled her into a hug. "Are you okay, Mom?" Margaret smiled through tears. "I am now." James turned back to Calloway. "As of this moment, you're under federal investigation." Calloway staggered back. "What?" "Oh, and one more thing," James said, stepping aside as 2 federal agents entered. They slapped Calloway in cuffs. "You're under arrest," one agent said. Calloway stammered, but I," James smirked. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before abusing your badge." Officer Calloway thought he could abuse his power without consequence. But he never imagined that the very woman he mistreated was the mother of an FBI agent who had the authority to end his entire career. This is exactly why justice matters, because when power is put in the wrong hands, it takes people like James Lewis to set things right. The way he walked into that police station, calm, composed, but ready to take down anyone who stood in his way, that was a legendary moment. And let's talk about Margaret Lewis. At 72 years old, she showed more dignity and strength than the very officer who tried to intimidate her. She didn't break, she didn't beg, she knew her worth. That's the power of resilience. This story reminds us that, no matter how much injustice exists in the world, there will always be people who fight back, people who don't back down, people who deliver the kind of justice that leaves a lasting impact. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to A One Storyteller, because we're just getting started. And trust me, the next story we have for you, it's even more shocking than this one. So stay tuned, because you won't believe what happens next.